Welcome everyone to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Groove. I'm the Advertising and Marketing Manager for HGA, and I am lucky enough to be your host today. Today's sponsor of Textiles and Tea is Cameron Taylor Brown and the wonderful textile center that she has founded called Arts Garage. Thank you, Cameron, for hosting this Textiles and Tea today. We will take questions. As always, we ask that you use the Q&A and not the chat. We love your comments though, but I won't see the questions unless it's in the Q&A. Today, we have Michael Rohde. He has been weaving since 1973. His formal education was actually in drawing, color design at the Alfred Glassel School of the Houston Museum of Fine Arts. His activities includes lectures, workshop teaching, juror, exhibit organizer, and exhibitor in very many local, national, and international juried and invited shows. Michael is one of those people that we would be here for hours if we listed everything he's been involved with, and we are so excited to have him here today on Textiles and Tea. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you for having me. And Whitney and Elizabeth, and especially to Cameron for sponsoring this. I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, good. Thank you. Well, we always start off with a very important question, which is, what is your favorite tea?
Well, I must confess that I'm mostly a coffee drinker, but when it comes to tea, the tea that I like are the smoky oolongs like Lapsang Souchong.
Oh, wow. Say that again.
Lapsang Souchong, which it's a smoked oolong tea.
Oh, okay.
So it has a very strong smoky flavor.
Oh, it sounds delicious.
Yeah, it is.
Can you share with us how you got started in fibers?
The story I always tell is that when I was in the early 1970s, I'd seen a young woman at school that was wearing a handwoven blouse, and I often say that it was probably badly made, otherwise I might not have noticed it. But it got the brain wheels whirling and saying, well, gee, how's cloth made? Could I make a shirt for myself? Well, that never happened, but that prompted me to buy a loom, rigid heddle loom, actually, in those days that came from England in a box, and that's how I started.
Well, many of our guests have been scientists, and you have a science background. So yeah. What do you think is the relationship for you, at least for weaving and science? And could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. As an undergraduate, I was a chemistry major, and through graduate school, I was chemistry major and eventually biochemistry, and finished my final degree with biochemistry. I think the overlap between weaving and science is that you have to be very careful to have good results. And so the discipline of one transfers to the other. I dye my own yards, and people ask if that's an overlap, but it's entirely different chemistry. So I don't think that the chemistry background I had before weaving applied too much, other than being careful and knowing how to measure and keep records.
I like that. I never thought about that, but you're right. That's great.
Yeah.
So you seem to embrace the nature of the beast of weaving, that it's, warp and weft. It's that perpendicular, and that you're not one who's trying to make circles in that weaving, no. That you go with the squares. Now, a good example of this is the partita, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Would you talk about this work?
Sure. This is, well, I started out weaving rugs that were all stripes and broken twill things and like that. And eventually I learned how to weave block weaves. And this is a block weave technique, but it has an added dimension of inlay, a bit like a Theomormon technique. It was first described by Barbara Hand many years ago in one of the magazines. So it obviously thinks about prayer rugs, but it also has a title because it was a part of a series of rugs I was doing that had some loose connection to musical themes. So the inlay part are the green parts at the upper edges of it. And all of the yarn in it are ones that I specifically dyed for the piece. I don't typically dye a large batch of yarns hoping that I will wind up with what I need. I dye things for what I need. And that was especially true with rugs. It's a little less true with tapestry, but especially for rugs, I will know exactly how much I need per inch of a rug.
Well, you use a floor loom for your work, and we have a picture of your loom. Would you talk a little bit about your design process? Do you draw your design out ahead of time? Do you use a computer?
Yeah, because I'd been weaving rugs for so many years before I actually moved on to tapestry. I just kept that idea of weaving row by row, designing tapestry that would be, as you said, honoring the grid of what the loom produces, but also that way of weaving. I usually will start with design on the computer because I'm weaving row by row, I can print that out on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and then know that all I need to do is weave until that particular row of that design is finished and then change colors for the next row. So that the computer allows me a chance to explore a number of different designs for a specific piece until I find one that I think is right. And then usually I will leave that design for a couple hours or even overnight and come back to it again once or twice after that, be sure absolutely that's right. There's a great tapestry weaver, James Kohler, once said, you're going to spend so much time weaving, there's no point in jumping into something with a half-baked idea in terms of the design. You want to spend as much time as necessary on the design to be sure that it's right for the amount of time you're going to spend weaving.
Well, I don't know if everybody saw it. Whitney, can you put that back up again just for a second? This is from Cameron, so I have to, and a couple other people. They love where your ball winder is. They think that's brilliant. So you put that there. So we have to say that. I like the idea about going away and then coming back to it. Do you find that you change your mind or you view it differently when you do that? Does that happen often?
Yeah, it does. And because what looks like a good idea, especially if you're at the end of the day when you're doing your design, you get tired and you say, okay, that's enough, I'm not doing anymore. And so you step away from it and you look at it again with fresh eyes, a few hours or a day or two later, and then you can more dispassionately view the design and see whether or not it satisfies you still, instead of just having completed something because you were tired.
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
Yes.
Now, the Art Institute of Chicago purchased one of your pieces. It's called Winter Lake Biwa.
Yes.
I think that's right. Now, is Lake Biwa's in Japan?
It is.
Okay.
It's near Kyoto. I'd been there for a science conference, and it was the first time I'd been to Japan. We visited, I visited, independent of the conference, a number of places like Kyoto and Tokyo and Nara Deer Park. But Lake Biwa is a beautiful deep blue lake. And in this series of kimono, I did 4 kimonos initially that each of them were tied to one of the seasons and to something in Japan. And this one was actually tied to not only the color of the lake, but also the beautiful indigo dyes that are used so much in Japan. At this point, however, I was using chemical dyes, so these are all chemically dyed, but emulating the idea of the indigo dyes. Later, I did learn how to dye indigo, but I didn't go back and redo the tapestry or the rug.
Well, I was curious because I think that's huge. It would be to me that the Art Institute would buy that. So what was your reaction? And do you think it changed how you viewed your future work or where you were going to go next?
I'm trying to think when they bought that, because it was they probably bought it like 6 or 8 years after I'd woven it.
It's 2001, I think.
Yeah, that's when I wove it, but
Oh, that's when you wove it.
when I
Okay.
actually made the purchase, it may have been 3 years after I'd woven it.
Oh, okay.
But so I pretty much by then moved on in terms of what I was doing.
Huh.
This ironically was woven as a rug with rug techniques and the inlay that we'd seen in Partita earlier. And a couple of years after this was woven, I decided to switch to tapestry because most of the rugs were winding up on the wall. I mean, this is obviously something that would never have wound up on the floor anyway. But the gallery owner who handled the sale to the Art Institute had asked me the question. She says, "Why are you weaving rugs when you should be weaving tapestry?" And so I took her advice. About the same time, I was invited to exhibit in a tapestry triennale in Europe.
Did you find that you changed your approach to weaving when you said this is no longer for the floor?
I felt that switching to tapestry opened up a lot more options than I had even doing the inlay, because now I was free to let the weft make designs anywhere that weren't confined to where the blocks that had been set up by the weave structure were. So one of the first tapestry that I wove was actually a series of houses, which would have been very difficult in that sort of block weave. They would have looked very chunky like the Partita piece. And by weaving them in tapestry now, they look like little house with a chimney and the sun above it. Well, they didn't, but you know what I mean. Look like something you'd find on a refrigerator. They're quite simplistic, but still not as blocky as the block weave imagery was.
Was it a hard transition for you to say, I mean, to just walk away from it? Were there times you're like, oh, I really would like to take a shot at that again? Or did you do any rugs afterwards?
I was invited to teach at Penland in 2011, and it was to teach a rug weaving class for someone they'd hired that wasn't able to do it. So I stepped in thanks to Catherine Ellis, who promoted my name and suggested that they get a hold of me. So for that workshop, I taught the students at the same time I was weaving some small rugs for the Penland auction. So those were, I think, the only rugs I've woven since I made that transition.
Well, you have, you're well known as a tapestry artist, but the more I read about you, the more I kind of think you're also a dyeing artist. It seems like your dyeing is more than, oh, I just want to get a color on a yarn. I believe I saw a comparison that you mix dyes like artist mixes their paint, and that the white yarn is like a white canvas that you create on. What is that true for you?
It is very much true. About the same time I learned how to weave, once I got beyond the rigid heddle stuff, I started taking classes when I was in North Carolina and learned about how to dye your own yarns and do it in a way that was sustainable in terms of producing colors that would last. And from that point on, I simply said, well, why be stuck with the few colors that are on the shelf in a yarn store when I could have all the colors I want? And so for a number of years, I simply dyed very slow step gradients in rugs. So there was a great gradient that maybe had 60 different steps of color in it. And I felt that this gave what I was making something that was different than an off-the-shelf color palette. You know, it takes a number of things to make a finished piece be exceptional, and one is good craftsmanship, and hopefully I do that. The other is good design, hopefully I do that, and then things that you don't expect, and that being colors or things that sort of jump into the design that you wouldn't expect to be there, things that you will see when you get close. You see something from a distance and it gives you one impression, and then all of a sudden you say, well, there's something there that draws me in and I want to look more at it. And then you look further and further into the piece. So
I would imagine the yarns work well together color-wise also if they're being dyed together. Is that true, or?
yes. I mean, sometimes, especially when I started doing the faces, I wound up using things that were yarns that were left over from a different projects, and they weren't always the same yarns. And when I was doing the rugs, it was the same yarn throughout with just different dyes on it. But when I began doing tapestries, then I was able to mix yarns with different sources, textures, alpaca, silk, other things combined in the same piece.
Well, you have a language series that the first one, I believe, was the Tibetan prayers. And
Yes.
this is kind of an earlier work. And would you talk about where this idea came from?
Certainly. I like to travel, as many of us do. And this one came about after having spent a month in eastern rural Tibet in the grasslands. And we encountered Tibetan prayer flags hanging in windy passes usually. And this whole idea of taking a plain piece of cloth, printing a prayer on it, and then hanging it in the windy areas so that the prayers would be carried on by the wind to everyone around. And it was simply not something that the person who designed it or put it up was. It was something for everyone. And it became no longer sacred in its own right, and where they were left to simply disintegrate back into the materials that they were made from. And so I liked that whole idea. And so I came back with some Tibetan yarn that I dyed with the madder color. This is yarn that John Eric Reese, another weaver that I think a lot of people know, he had managed to buy a big ball of it. And there were three of us, John and anyway, we divided that yarn up three ways after I dyed it. And then I didn't have quite enough to weave the whole thing. So I decided, well, what else would I put into this thing in terms of yarn that would honor the whole idea of that? And I discovered that I had quite a bit of Navajo type yarn. And I said, well, let's go ahead and include that. And my thinking on that was a bit political, in that the same thing that had happened to the Navajos when the Europeans arrived here was and is happening to the Tibetans in their homelands.
The title of these next works are so perfect. Imperative, inflammatory, illuminative, and they're words that are used in the describing of language. But you have related these words to events in our lives, right?
Yes. If we have time, I'll talk a little bit more about how these are related to language.
I'd love to. Yeah.
We looked at. There are a few scholars of ancient Andean Incan textiles that think that these incredible textiles that have repeated patterns, that have slight variations in color and arrangements, embedded language that we haven't been able to decipher yet. And I looked at a number of those and said, I like that idea, but I'm not going to copy what the Peruvians have done already. I'm going to invent my own language, and it will have a unit, one of those small blocks that have an arrangement of smaller blocks within that. And so on the computer, I will design 160 little blocks that will become my sketch for each row. And they will be drawn at random out of a bucket of those 160 as I weave each row. So the language is not decipherable in its own right because it's random, the way I've produced it. But where it becomes significant is in the color choices. So the first piece is called Imperative because it reflects the colors of fading newspapers. And we all feel impelled to read newspapers. The second piece is talking about inflammatory language, and that's the title of it, inflammatory. But ironically, it was also being produced at the same time. There was a wildfire nearby, and I had to evacuate the house and come back and finish weaving it later. So it took on a double meaning right now.
Yeah.
That particular one is on exhibit in San Jose at the Museum of Quilts and Textiles. And then the third one on the right is trying to think of something more positive about how language might be used. And so a very, very rough approximation of what those colored blocks are on the background is the big and the little dipper. And so they're guiding people along, illuminating the way to doing something better, a better path. Optimistic.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. So I understand the beginning of the pixelation series began with the designing of a piece called Green is the Color and Green is the Cause. And this is another great story, and I hope you'll share this with us. And then we've got several images we're going to show. Okay. We'll start with this one.
Yeah, this is the piece that I wove. The title of the exhibition was Green, the Color and the Cause at the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C. in 2011. And Rebecca Stevens, the curator, and Lee Armstrong, the curator, decided that they wanted artists to respond to that idea where the color and environmental issues would overlap in some way. And so this was my piece, and I decided I started thinking, how would I go about making something like this? And do we have other images in there to look at? Yeah, okay. So I decided that the Amazon rainforest would be a place to zero in on. So I started with a Google satellite image of South America, coming in close on the rainforest in Brazil, and on the far right, picking that area with a small lake in the middle of it, and thought that this would probably be a wonderful idea to use and take that digital image and pixelate it beyond the level of what Google Earth has in Photoshop. So there's only 24 blocks across, or 24 pixels. And then the irony, as I began researching further about that, is that this particular lake was a man-made lake. So it was also a stand-in for what happens when you divert water for different uses. Something gains and something's lost. And so in the final piece, you have the bright green fields on the right side, and then the area that's been depleted of the water that would have normally gone if the dam hadn't been built.
That really changes how you view the piece when you hear the whole story of it. Thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. Now, from this, the whole pixelation kind of took off, right? And you started doing these amazing portraits. And in these works, Enough and Dream,
yes.
It seems that in your work, you often give some information. This kind of refers back to what you were talking about with the language, is that you give some information and that you invite the viewer to come in and to look at it and just see what they see. And in these two works, you may not know who the people are, but you want to look at it and you enjoy it anyway. And I think there was a statement once that I saw that from you that says that you convey a message, but you let the beauty of the textile seduce people in first, and then later you find out what it's all about. Can you say some more about that?
Sure, exactly. I should back up a little bit and talk about the other thing that happened when I switched from rugs to tapestries, is all of a sudden I stopped worrying about design as an end in itself as the first thing I did. And with the tapestries now, I almost always start with an idea or a concept. And so that's what's happening with these pictures. I like the idea of giving people enough information that they should be able to figure things out for themselves instead of hitting them over the head by saying this is so-and-so and that is so-and-so. And so I give them deliberately ambiguous, but enough clue in the title that they could figure it out if they think about it. So a lot of people will look at a piece of artwork on the wall, and if they don't understand it, then they'll look at the label for the title and they'll try to make more out of it. One way in which I could see this whole process evolving was at an exhibit where I had one of these images that was of Frida Kahlo with the flowers in her hair and the bright red lipstick. And the title was Reality from a quote of her own. One of the men that was viewing it came up to me and said, "That's Margaret Thatcher, isn't it?" And I went, no, who else could it be?
I like that.
Yep.
Well, in other interviews, I've heard that from other fiber artists, they mention your name and they talk about how you were so important in their work and that you were an inspiration to them. So I'm curious, who influenced you and who was your inspiration?
Oh boy. You know, there's so many that I'm going to offend people by leaving them out, but I'll start way back at the very beginning. And I was still weaving rugs, and I was in a guild in Houston where they had a very strong program of bringing outside speakers in. And so one of the first speakers they brought in that I had a chance to talk to was Cynthia Shearer. And in casual conversation with her, she asked what I did, and I said, "Well, I'm a scientist. I'm not really an artist, so I'm never going to go any far." And she looks at me straight in the eye. And she says, "How long are you going to use that excuse?" About 20 years later, I had a chance to see her again and told her the story and reminded her how much I appreciated it. The other person that came through that I really established a strong friendship with for her short period around, and that was Diane Hitter. She encouraged me to apply to be a not a lab assistant, but a workshop assistant at Haystack. But I wasn't able to get the 5 weeks off work where I was working then to do that, but I appreciated that. The two of us exchanged slides and kept up correspondence for a while until her, and in fact, in her last year, she was going to come out and be the keynote speaker at a conference that I helped organize here, but the cancer treatment was more than she could do it, but so she wasn't able to come. And then along the way, I've taken workshops from Theo Mormon when she was alive.
Wow.
I confounded her because I didn't follow the directions on how we were supposed to warp, and I alternated colors. I'm always doing that.
You're one of those, aren't you?
Yeah, she was very gracious. She says, "Oh, okay." Randy Darwall, just an incredible person to learn about color from. And then a lot of times I will take a workshop with someone who I know I don't, or at the time I don't think I will do what they're doing. And Kate Anderson, the knotter, the basket maker that does all those wonderful teapots. I just wanted to see how her brain worked, and so I made a little thing in the workshop, and I thought that was fine. But a few years later, I decided, okay, well, I'm going to try to do that at a different scale, and I did some baskets for a while, which I stopped doing. And Cameron, who sponsored this, she and I joined a guild that she was part of, as a juried guild, and we had mostly professional artists in it, and she was a kind of a role model to me because of her approach to what she was doing in terms of weaving, not just simply making functional, useful things or gifts for other people. And Deborah Jarko, I had the privilege of sharing actually the same studio. We saw Deborah's talk a few weeks ago, and this is where she was giving her talk from with a virtual background, and the space behind me was filled with all of her yarn. She's now moved to Arizona, and I've taken over this part of the space. And there are a couple of other artists in the studio with me that I share. Regina Vorgang, a wonderful rug weaver, and Arlene Mead, who's a painter. And the three of us now share the space where Deborah and Arlene and Regina had been. I don't know. I've left out too many people.
Well, that's a pretty nice list there.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this then. If you could go back and mentor, be the inspiration for a younger Michael,
yeah,
what do you think you would say to yourself? And at what time in your life do you think it would be important to mentor a younger Michael?
I think somewhere along the line, beyond the point of having first started in whatever you're going to do, when you've got a few of the ideas and the techniques, the basics underway, learn the rules first, and then you can break them, sort of idea. But I would tell them to don't doubt yourself. Make something every day if you can, and keep on trying to do something different.
I was curious about the different part. I was wondering, do you find that trying, basket making or whatever, that helps you be a better weaver, a better tapestry artist when you go outside of your particular field?
I think the only reason that the baskets worked for me is that I was dyeing the yarn for them. I was using it like a largish size linen instead of the small wax linen, and it was unwaxed. And I said, well, can I work with unwaxed linen? And so I would dye all the yarn, space dye it in such a way, and that gave a pattern in the baskets when I made them. Other than that, they weren't terribly interesting nor terribly well finished, but they were something I could do. When I needed time to sit and have something that was portable and I didn't have a loom to carry around with me. But I think, I go back to something else that I'd learned early on from other weavers. It says if you can buy something somewhere else already made, why do it yourself? Make something that's different.
Oh, I like that. Make something different. Yeah. I know a lot of people are going to ask you to talk some about what's behind you. So this is your studio space?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is studio space. I have a studio at home.
You do? Oh, okay.
Yeah, you showed the big loom at home. That was my home studio. And I've got an 8-foot cranbrook there. But here I've got a 50-inch Maycumber that I bought from Deborah Jarko. And so in order to not have what I need in one place not be in somewhere else, I only work on small things here. So on the wall over my shoulder here are a number of small pieces that I've done in this area. Since we sort of expanded in the space, there's now room to hang some of the larger rugs that I still have, including the Partita rug that you showed early on.
I saw that.
And the one next to it, which is another rug that I did back in the early 2000s, I think. So.
And what kind of loom is that you have back there? You just said, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's a Maycumber, and it's about 50-inch weaving width.
Okay.
I don't think I've woven anything more than about 13 inches wide. So those are the two ones in the frames right over my ear. Were at that woven on that width. And I'm also working with different yarns here, use smaller yarns than I would use on the big loom at home.
And it's just a matter of keeping your materials separate, that make sure you have what you need there and you have what you need at home.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we have a bunch of questions. So how about we move over to that? Oh, wait a minute. I wanted to ask you one more thing. I'm sorry. What's next for you? What's on your radar now?
Yeah, what I have on the loom now are, well, first of all, there's one thing that's already completed, and that is a two-person museum show that will open in March in Pomona, California. And it will be a pairing between myself and another friend of mine who's a ceramic artist, ceramic sculptor. And she does work by coiling clay and until she builds a very large vessel, as which she calls them, and then puts them in the kiln and overfires them. And so all those coils clump and they make these absolutely wonderful shapes that almost look like textiles. So in the show, we will each have some of our own work that we've done independent of each other. But then we've also got a small handful where we've looked at the other person's work and made something in response to that. So I'll have a number of pixelated things in response to her work, and she'll have a number of vessel forms that she's made in response to looking at some of the existing tapestries that I already have will be in that show. So beyond that, what was next? I'm trying to work on simplification of color patterns, choices, minimalize the brightness that I've been using, try to see how well that works. So I've got a whole series started on my loom at home, and we'll have to see how that goes. I typically will put on a long warp and weave until that warp is done, and I won't see with them until they're all come off at the same time.
Oh, wow.
So I'll have, this will have 12 yards on it. I'll wind up with maybe 8 or 10 pieces at the end of that, and then I'll evaluate it. Which I think is a good way to move forward, but so I'm not taking something off and going, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I just go on and worry about the whole body of work once it's off. Questions?
Well, so if people wanted to find out about this exhibit, will it be on your website? Where it is and what the dates and everything?
Yes, or on social media.
Okay.
It will open in March of 2020, and the museum is American Museum of Ceramic Art, or AMOCA.org, and they already have it on their site. The
What
way my
city?
wife, Pomona, California.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So it's already on their website?
Yeah, it's on their website. The way my website's set up, I don't really have an easy way to say what's coming up. It's mostly about what's already completed and available. So. Okay.
And how are we going to find out about this new work? Where will we see that next?
I'll have to finish it first.
We'll be watching. We want to see this.
Okay. Yep.
All right. Well, let's ask some questions. First up, Robin Spady. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Robin.
In addition to your large tapestry, you also produce lovely small pieces from small tapestries and wedge weave, hand woven silk pins. What is your motivation? Diversity in price point, allowing people like myself to purchase your work, portability of the technique, providing another creative outlet for you, etc. Great question, Robin. And all kinds of people are like, yeah, we want to know the answer.
Yeah, diversity in price point is one thing. That's the reason I wound up doing the pins and the necklaces, so that when I've had exhibits at museums, they want something for the gift shop. The small wedge.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. The small wedge weaves are things that I scaled down one of Archie Brennan's copper pipe looms to have something that would be portable. So when I went to Tibet, I had these little loom with me, so I've always had something with me that I can be working on it. So I'm, it's like having a drop spindle. You've always got something going in your hands.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, speaking of sizes, everybody keeps asking, what are the sizes of your rugs? I think that's been up there at least 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, the ones behind me, the partita is first of all those sizes of the rugs, and if you look hard enough, the prices are on my website. The partita one is about 4.5 feet by 7.
Mhm.
And the one next to it is a little bit wider. It's about 5 feet by 6.5 feet. Those are the rugs I have now. They're
Is
still
it hard to jump back and forth when you design real big and then you go small and then you go big again? Or is it all the same?
Well, because I work the way I do with it, I put on a long warp and then I weave until that's done. I will. Part of that's dictated by what size warp I decide to put on.
Yeah.
When I was doing the language pieces, I decided I wanted to have large pieces for exhibition. I said, if I'm not selling the medium-sized pieces, so let's just make big pieces for shows.
I don't know how far you want to go into this. Kimberly Gavin's saying, how could you talk us some about the difference between tapestry and rug weaving? I'm not sure what specifically she's asking for.
Yeah, it's a matter of function and how you set up the weaving for the function. If you're going to put something on the floor, you want it to have a strong warp, and also you want it to be thick enough that it will withstand wear. So most rug weave structures are more or less 2 layers, and they have block weaves are certainly 2 layers interlaced within the blocks, and then they're woven on linen warp because that's a good strong warp. The tapestry is simply plain weave, but where the warp doesn't show, you're covering the warp, and the warp is a heavy cotton seam twine.
Oh, okay. Here you go. What would be your advice from someone starting out in tapestry?
Are good ways to learn about tapestry. One of the best that currently is available is Rebecca Medsoff's online classes. She is a wonderful teacher. Her online classes work quite well. And then there are a whole American Tapestry Alliance has a list of instructors on its website, in addition to Rebecca, that actually come to guilds and give teaching. I think Rebecca does most of hers online nowadays. I think that's probably the best way.
Okay. Sharon Alderman says, hi, Michael.
I'm fine. Sharon said hi.
Yeah.
I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sharon Alderman says hi. I'm sorry.
Oh, hi, Sharon.
Tapestry seems to be enjoying a significant surge in interest. Boy, that's true. Why do you think that is? And what do you most love about this type of weaving? That's from Fazia Rizzi.
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit of a mystery to me why it's enjoying the surge of interest, although I do have, well, I would be disingenuous not to reveal that I had been on the board of the American Tapestry Alliance for about 8 years, but I think that they've done a lot in terms of promoting the field, but that's mostly to people who are already tapestry weavers. Where the other interest is coming from, I'm not sure. I mean, there's a lot of fiber being used in the traditional art field now these days, and some of those are tapestry, some are not. There are young, exciting weavers that are breaking the mold, like Aaron Riley and Dan Doyle. That traditional tapestry weavers kind of who are weaving more traditional things are a little put off by. Some of them are, but not some of them are embracing it. I do. I think they're both doing wonderful things. So.
I'm also struck by how popular the little tapestry looms are. Kind of like you were saying, how mobile it is, and you don't have to have a weaving room now to weave. You can take it off and go.
I mean, Archie Brennan started that, but he was very generous in giving out his design, that you could go to the hardware store and get copper pipes and put a loom together. And I think for some people that put it together yourself may have been an impediment, but now that there are, the traditional loom makers are actually making tapestry looms, makes it much more easy. So I think that's probably part of it.
Lori Zollinger wants to know, do you use mostly wool or what kind of fibers? I'm assuming she means for weft.
Yeah, for weft I do use mostly wool, especially for the bigger tapestries. For the wedge weaves, the little silk, I use silk on those because I usually put them in frames and under UV filtering plexiglass just to protect the silk. You know, I worry a little bit about silk and larger tapestries that are exposed to harsh light, but you know, we can't control things once they're out of our hands. Let's put it that way.
Nancy Riley was saying, what are the titles of the two portraits? One was Dream, and that was the Martin Luther King, right? And the other one is Enough.
Enough, yes. Enough is Emma Gonzalez from the Parkland shooting survivors, and you know, enough is enough of this violence. So
it sounds like you don't just do images, you also have a lot of, well, not a lot, at least some social themes in the work that you do.
Yeah, and not just because it's trendy now. You know, I was doing this before, you know, all of the well-deserved concern about social themes that have come up over the last couple of years. I think it's, you know, as I say, things start with ideas, and if I'm thinking about something and that's something I decide that I can engage people by making an image that they look at and then hopefully think about.
Did you get much blowback from your themes at any time?
No. The very first tapestry I did that I talked about with houses was made for an exhibition in Poland, and it was made at the time that the second invasion of Iraq was being planned, which I didn't think was a good idea. And so it was a lamentation on destruction of life and houses in the time of war. The State Department has an Art and Embassies program, and one of that president's appointees asked if she could borrow it for display in her ambassador's residence. I said, okay.
You're a sneaky guy. That is a great story. Thank you for sharing that with us. Oh my gosh. Well, somebody's asking, Karen LeBlanc was saying, how do you finish your tapestry, and do you do anything to prevent fading? And you talked about how you use silk behind plexiglass. Do you have to do anything else?
No, well, when I was using chemical dyes, I sought out the dyes that had the best light fastness ratings. It took me a long time to make the transition to natural dyes, and that came about because of a workshop I took with Michelle Whiplinger and Kathy Hattori when they were working together, and learn which dyes are the ones that are not going to fade. And so the only dyes that I use I have primaries that I use. Indigo is wonderful. It doesn't fade. It's usually the last thing to fade, except under, you know, when it's not been dyed properly. Cochineal is extremely light fast. Madder, the same. Yellows are a little bit more prone to fading, but the ones that fade the least are weld and black oak bark, and in general, anything that's dyed a very strong, intense color will fade more slowly than something that's not. That's lighter.
So you're all natural dyes now. That's all you're doing. Okay.
So,
yeah, that is interesting because your colors are incredible, and there seems to be that idea that, oh no, natural dyes, you can't get that intense color. So that's good to know.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I first learned about natural dyes, that most of the books were talking about how to dye with plants that you gathered from the field, and it was a lot of yellows and browns.
Yeah, it's true.
So
You like
learning,
yellow, there you're there.
but I have a different reason for dyeing than people that are making clothing do. I mean, those colors that fade more rapidly are not an issue for clothing. I think they're perfectly fine, and certainly if you want to be environmentally conscious and only harvest things nearby instead of buying things that are shipped from somewhere else.
I have to read this. This is from Andrea Thiessen. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Sorry, Andrea. She said, I teach tapestry in small classes in person, and I get a lot of medical people, nurses, psychologists, psychiatrists, etc., who seem attracted to tapestry for its therapeutic process, a meditative, slow cloth process, and the freedom of design, which I think is lovely. I'm glad she shared that with us. She goes, and then a couple of people have asked this, are you teaching at all? And where?
Yeah, I've pretty much stopped teaching because the things that I taught before were rug weaving, and I haven't woven a rug in 20 years or more. Is that right? Yeah, 20 years. And dyeing, and teaching dyeing is so labor intensive ahead of the workshop, and I find that most people that take the dyeing workshop say, oh, now that I know how to do that, I'll never do it again.
Oh, no.
So I don't. I will sometimes, give lectures, especially if I don't have to travel. I do want to be in my studio as much as possible, trying to do things, and so traveling is an impediment to that. I enjoyed teaching while I was doing it, but I think I'm at the point I'm probably doing very little to none.
Well, I agree with you about the dyeing. You've got to be dedicated to take on that. Barbara Huth wants to know, have you ever considered weaving on a vertical loom?
I had a loom for a while that was convertible from flat floral loom to a vertical loom. And I tried it once as a vertical loom, and it just didn't appeal to me. I'd actually like weaving on the cranbrook because it has locking treadles. That means that I stand to weave. I don't sit the whole time. And if I were weaving vertically, I'd be sitting the whole time in most cases. Maybe not necessarily, but I haven't ever explored it beyond that one attempt and decided that it was not for me. It all has to do with what you learn first.
True. It's like back to front, front to back. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, this is a good question. Sherry Davis, if you were to study with anybody else right now, past or present, shouldn't say right now, past or present, who would you choose?
Oh, I've discovered, especially more recently, like in the last 10 years or so, that I'm a terrible student. I go in for a workshop, and when the teacher tries to teach something new, I try to put it into the way I'm already thinking about doing it, and I'm not a good student. I'm used to what I'm doing. But I think I would take workshops with people if I wanted to understand their design process, maybe, or just their way of approaching the whole thing rather than technique specific. I'd have to think about that. I mean, there are a lot of people out there who I admire, and some of the ones I'd want to study with, they're probably not teaching either. So, oh well.
Well, Madeline Tung wants to know, and I'm going to tack on a question at the end of hers. She said, do you keep a written journal as you progress? And then my question for that is, have you thought about doing a book?
Oh, well, I'll answer the last one first. People asked me when I was weaving rugs about writing a book on rug weaving. I said, Peter Collier has written everything that ever needs to be written on rug weaving. I'm not going to try to attempt that. I have friends who have written books, and I've, Deborah Jarko, for example, and I've seen what they've gone through. And I said, that's not important to me. So no, I'm not going to write a book. Do I keep a journal? Not a journal per se. When I was doing the chemical dyeing, I would keep very meticulous records about how I was dyeing them because then I could reproduce colors. But with the natural dyes, I'll keep loose notes in a bound notebook about what I did to make that particular dye bath work. I think I may have said before that with the chemical dyes, I could print the design off the computer, dye the colors that I wanted and get them exactly, and then just go right straight ahead. But now with the natural dyes, because they're always just a little unpredictable, it's more like a dialogue. I will dye the yarns after I've printed the thing, and then I'll go back to the design and say, okay, this is what I've got in terms of yarns. What do I need to modify to work with what I have now?
Well, Michael, I hate to say this, but we're going to stop for today.
Oh, no.
I know. This has been so much fun. We could just sit and have more tea, coffee, whatever, and just keep going. Thank you for your time and sharing with us your stories. It's wonderful. We do appreciate it. Now, if you want to see more, and his website's got lots more, check out Michael's website at michaelrohde.com. And you can see his exhibits and his work and much, much more there. Beautifully made website, very impressive. I want to thank again our sponsor, again to Cameron Taylor Brown and the Textile Center she founded, Arts Garage. There's all kinds of things there. They do workshops. They have the Talking Arts, Talking Textiles Zoom. And I love this one. She does free seminars for teachers to introduce them to fiber and getting fiber in the classroom. Good on you, Cameron. And there's so much more. So go check out her website, which is artsgaragela.com. Be sure you put the LA in there. If you don't, you get another website. And thank you, Cameron, for sponsoring Textiles and Tea, and especially Michael's. It's a kind of a nice connection. If you would like to sponsor a Textiles and Tea, or your company or your guild, please go on our website, and there's more information there at weavespindye.org. Also, we get support from the Fiber Trust. Thank you so much for donating. If you would like to support HGA and see more programming like this, please go online and you can join or donate or both at weavespindye.org. And speaking of more programming, we are in the midst of Spinning and Weaving Week, graciously sponsored by Long Thread Media. It's only been a day, 2 days. We still have more going on tonight. It's just been amazing. If you have not signed up yet, please come join us. We've had beautiful tours of studio spaces. We've had artists talking about their works. We also have shopping. We were at Eugene Textiles today, and that was so much fun seeing everything they had. So come join us. You can register online, again, weavespindye.org, and join us for the week. We've got so much more coming up. We got the fashion show at the end of the week. And if you haven't noticed it yet, Convergence is open for registration. If you haven't finished the classes that you want for this summer in Knoxville, you can sign up now. So again, go to the website, weavespindye.org, and sign up. If you have missed any of the Textiles and Tea and you would like to watch them again, I'm going to watch Michael's again. You can see them all on Facebook. You do not have to have a Facebook account. I know some people don't want to. You can just go on and watch the event. Eventually, we'll all have them on YouTube. We're just not up there yet. Thank you so much for being here today. It's been a wonderful afternoon. And next week, we have Ellen Noble, and we're going to have tea with her. Have a great week. I hope I'll see you the rest of the week in Spinning and Weaving Week. And happy tea.